Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad to have you with us for the Tuesday, the Election Day edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We are finally here. I don't know if we'll have winners tonight or on the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. I certainly hope we do. The last two cycles would suggest, well, I guess in 2016 we did know by the next day, but 2020 we certainly did not. 2000 we certainly did not. So we'll see where things land. Good, bad, and crazy martinis today. I have to say, the fundraising pitches are still coming in fast and furious. I'm not sure what they're going to do with that money at this point, except maybe just build up the bank for the next cycle.
Money that fast. Not even government can spend that money that fast. No, it's too late. You missed your chance.
Doris, this is the perfect time to make your first donation this cycle. Sure it is. All right, let's get into our double-barreled good martini. First of all, over at Hot Air, they mentioned that the Cook Political Report, which is certainly not partisan. The thing with these prognosticators is they want to be right. So their final reports are the ones that are what they really think. And so they're not looking at predicting the results like we do and like Larry Sabato does and others, but they're looking at trends based on 2020 versus 2024. And the Cook Political Report says in 2020, black voters broke for Joe Biden 90-9. And right now they've got Harris leading 80-15, which is a little more lopsided than some were suggesting a little while ago. So we'll see if that's the case. But if it is, that's a decent pickup for Trump. 18 to 29-year-olds, Biden led 60-37 in 2020. Harris leads 54-41. So that is narrowed. Hispanic voters, Biden led also 60-37. Harris leads 53-41. Gender gap. Last time Trump led men by 8. Biden won women by 15. This time Trump wins men by almost 11. Harris wins women by just over 11. So, Jim, we're all going to be watching the 7 states tonight. If we get any surprises beyond the 7 states, we might know pretty early tonight how things are headed. But obviously we're looking at Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And so when it comes to predicting this, it's very, very difficult. You've already done it publicly in a number of places, the Editor's Podcast, the Washington Post, and beyond. So I know you said Pennsylvania's the linchpin, but how did you come to your conclusion?
Yeah, and that's the one I feel least confident in. Put up a corner post relatively late yesterday afternoon saying, look, I picked Trump. I think right now I'm still picking Trump, but you can hear just how confident I am in my voice. The partisan split is better than it was for Trump, 4 years ago. But you're still saying we're 400,000 votes down going in on Election Day. Now, maybe Trump wins 2/3 of the votes cast on Election Day. And if so, he'll probably win Pennsylvania, and he might do so by a better margin than anybody expected. But almost all the polling has had it 50-50. The fact that Harris spent, all day in Pennsylvania yesterday says to me they think they're in trouble. Or not that they're in trouble, that they don't feel like they've got it locked up a good way. Anyway, just kind of going down the list. Arizona for Trump, early vote looks real good on that one. Georgia for Trump, it's a southern state. He's led most of the polls there. Not by a lot, but I just kind of feel like if Harris was going to win, we would have seen some leads out there. Michigan, your former home state, I'm giving to Harris. Sorry. Nevada, John Ralston predicted a Harris win by 0.3 of a percentage point. I'm going to be really bold, go the other way by 0.3 of a percentage point. I think Trump wins Nevada. That's a pretty darn nice looking lead for the number of registered Republicans who voted. And if Nevada goes Democrat, then the Harry Reid machine will just always be Lucy in the football. We'll never win that state. We should always say, way to go, Nevada, way to go. North Carolina, go to Trump. He's won at the last 2 cycles. I know it's really close and neck. I know he's done 3 events in North Carolina in the last 3 days before the election, which to me indicates a certain amount of nervousness there. But it's generally a Republican state, and I think it'll go that way. Again, Pennsylvania, I picked Trump, but this is the one I'm most nervous about. Wisconsin, I give to Harris. Nebraska's 2nd district to give to Harris, and they didn't ask about this on the Post questionnaire, but I think Maine's 2nd district goes to Trump. If it all shakes out that way, it goes 287 electoral votes to 251. But if Pennsylvania flips, Harris wins 270 to 268. So that's how it is, for as they used to say on SportsCenter, for those of you scoring at home, or those of you listening alone. And regarding the Senate, I added up. At first, I thought it was a 54-seat Senate majority. Then I recounted, and I think it's 53. I have Republicans picking up in Montana, which, by the way, I should point out, there's a little bit of nervousness about that last story of Sheehy and how he got shot and whether the story adds up and all that stuff. He's been ahead in the polls for a while, so I think this one feels okay, but we'll see. No, I don't believe Dan Osborne is going to beat Deb Fischer. And if that comes to pass, if Fischer wins, I'm going to laugh at everyone who predicted otherwise. That's the one I'm going to really go out and give people grief about. Moreno wins in Ohio. And apparently I am out on a limb all by myself saying Dave McCormick wins in Pennsylvania. I'm a little bit surprised by that, at least amongst the Post columnists. We'll see if that one shakes out, I will be making fun of people. Otherwise, I got way too optimistic in Pennsylvania. And like 2 years ago, I thought Oz was going to win, and you see how that shook out. So take all appropriate grains of salt that you feel needed, America. But then again, watch those sodium levels.
Slightly more competent candidate this time, but I'm going to be very weaselly on my Electoral College prediction because I'm very torn on two states at the end, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I had thought that Arizona was going to slip away from Trump because of the abortion referendum, but if the polling is accurate, he's got a pretty steady lead, either right at or even beyond the margin of error. We're even seeing some polls that Kerry Lake is closing. One had it tied. If that's even remotely accurate, Trump will win Arizona easily. So I'm carefully edging Arizona into that column. I do think the Harry Reid machine comes through in Nevada, so that's 6 for Harris. I think Trump wins North Carolina again. I think he wins Georgia this time, and then it gets difficult. Michigan, I think, is fool's gold almost as much as Nevada is. I think it's interesting that so many Arab Christian leaders and Muslim leaders endorse Trump. Whether the voters follow that advice, whether they go to Jill Stein, whether they just stay home, definitely hurts Kamala Harris. But in what numbers is that going to happen? But I still think Michigan goes blue. And then Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I think, could be very, very close. Wisconsin's been just very, very tight the last two cycles. Trump barely won it over Hillary, and Biden barely won it over Trump. I think the most important election of this entire year that nobody paid attention to outside of Wisconsin was that swing seat on the state Supreme Court. And if there are legal challenges there or Pennsylvania, both of those courts are going to favor the Democrats. I don't know if it'll be that close, but if I had to stake my life on it, I'd give the slight edge to Harris. But if, again, the election day vote proportions are like they have been the last couple cycles, match that with the Republican early vote doing much, much better, then it could be a very, very good night for Republicans. In the Senate, I'm at 52-48. I'm every seat you are except for Pennsylvania. Maybe McCormick's been ahead in one poll, maybe tied in one or two others, but Casey's been very stubborn either way. I don't think that Pennsylvania will probably split there in terms of president versus Senate. Whichever party wins one will probably win the other. It's possible that Hovde could beat Baldwin in Wisconsin, but I'm not going to predict that. Ultimately, it's Moreno, West Virginia, and Tim Sheehy, so +3 for Republicans there. The House, the Hill newspaper is saying that this could go weeks before we know because it's so tight, and I don't know who's going to win there. I'd probably give the edge a little bit to the Dems just because it seems, Jim, that every time the Dems aggressively redistrict, nobody really challenges them except that one time in New York, but now they flipped that. But every time the Republicans have control of the legislature and want to aggressively draw the map, well, the courts seem to throw that out and force a less advantageous map. So we'll find out. But in terms of the larger point here in the Good Martini, we're thankful for the Electoral College. The popular vote is how we get the House of Representatives, and it's how we apportion things. But ultimately, the founders had a very good idea here. I know the Democrats don't like it because of the last couple times that the Democrats won the popular vote and didn't win the presidency, but it's smart. It gives states like Nevada, as John Ralston always says, the confirmation that they matter. And if they're close, the candidates will pay close attention there. Some people have suggested tweaks. There's, of course, the popular vote compact and so forth. You and I were bantering around this morning about what if we did them all like Nebraska and Maine and just have every congressional district go to a candidate rather than the entire load of the state electoral votes, which would be very, very interesting. But I think on a day like today, it's like every day, we should be very grateful for how the founders envisioned this.
Greg, a couple of weeks ago, I was, in fact, this was when I was up in Bucks County, swing state. And some guy had said, this is Electoral College is so stupid, the popular vote winner loses all the time. And I said, by all the time, you mean 5 times in American history. Out of I think we were up to, 50, 60 some presidential elections over that time. And he's like, well, Yeah, but it's like twice since 2000. Okay, twice since 2000. It's an unusual set of circumstances. It's going to happen every now and then. And the problem, if you went to a national popular vote system, then everyone would have an incentive to campaign in the cities and not campaign anywhere else. And you would not be hearing discussion of swing counties or anything like that, because you just want to run up your vote in as vote dense areas as possible. And you could completely ignore, quote unquote, flyover country. It was actually, ironically, after ranting and raving about the fact that my family couldn't believe this, but someone was wrong on the internet. And this is the sort of thing that gets Dad really agitated while driving in the car. My wife was driving, by the way. I'm not driving while checking Twitter and getting angry at random people. And I said, so we got into this discussion. It's like, so what is the problem we actually want to solve? And maybe I could understand somebody being annoyed that presidential elections usually come down to a handful of states. Sometimes, we've had 7 very consistently this cycle. The weird thing is how you really got to squint to get anything to be an 8th state. And, if you're in a whole bunch of states, you feel like your vote never matters because your state is either deep red or deep blue, and it's never all that competitive. So I came up with this idea, we have 2 states that do it by congressional district, Nebraska and Maine. And for a long time, it didn't really matter because the state all voted the same way. And then in the last few cycles, Trump has won 1 congressional district in Maine. And then last cycle, Biden won the congressional district that's around Omaha, Nebraska, and it looks like they're going to go that way again this time. So just imagine it's probably never going to happen, and you'd have to get every state to buy into it. But what if every state said, okay, we're switching over to that system? Well, all of a sudden, if you're a Democrat, you have a whole bunch of reasons to campaign in places like Texas and Florida and all of those, a bunch of those deep red states, because big deep red states have blue congressional districts in them. Mm-hmm. And similarly, if you're a Republican, suddenly you have reason to campaign in parts of New York State. You have reason to campaign in parts of California, and even maybe some places in Oregon and Washington and places like that. So all of a sudden, the state changes dramatically. And all of a sudden, big states have parts of them that are of value to the other party. Now, some people would argue maybe this makes it too much like a parliamentary system, but I look at that and I think, okay, that could be interesting. That could be a system where it would make more parts of the country would feel like they had more of a say, that their vote mattered, that they were not automatically lumped into one pile or the other. The downside is this would make congressional redistricting Thunderdome. It would make even the already high stakes, Ragnarok for all of these votes. So I just float that out there as an interesting thought. Again, not likely to ever happen, but clearly it's constitutional. Maine and Nebraska do this already. And I do kind of understand the frustration. Virginia is a pretty darn blue state. It used to be kind of swingy, but it's not that swingy anymore. And so if you're a state that hasn't been competitive in a generation, I can understand that frustration. And this is a potential proposal that I suspect will go nowhere.
Yeah, it probably won't, just like the popular vote compact won't. But I would point out to the Democrats that it's the popular vote in each state that determines the Electoral College. So it's not that the popular vote doesn't matter. You win by 5 million votes in California. I'm not sure that should trump, pardon the pun, everything else that happens across the country. So anyway, that's my thought on that. But meanwhile, as we mentioned yesterday, could be an early night tonight. Who knows if there's some momentum for one candidate or the other, or it could go on a while. And if you're going to be stressed out, I can understand wanting to have some adult beverages, but take Z-Biotics first. This night, above all nights this week, probably, and perhaps later into the week as well. Look, if you take Z-Biotics before you drink, you will feel better the next morning.
If you have too close to call on your drinking game, please be careful tonight. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. PhD scientists invented it to tackle your rough mornings after drinking. Now, here's how it works. When you drink, the alcohol that you drink gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as I'm sure you always do, and you will feel your best the next morning.
As I've said many times, got a colleague at Radio America who knew his limits. All of a sudden, the limits weren't working anymore. So he tried Z-Biotics. Now he's right back where he needs to be. Feels great the next morning. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And this is certainly not the type of news you like to wake up to, but the Wall Street Journal breaking this news. Western security officials say they believe that 2 incendiary devices shipped via DHL were part of a covert Russian operation that ultimately aimed to start fires aboard cargo or passenger aircraft flying to the U.S. and Canada. This as Moscow steps up a sabotage campaign against Washington and its allies. The devices ignited at DHL logistic hubs in July, one in Leipzig, Germany, and the other in Birmingham, England. The explosion set off a multinational race to find the culprits. Poland's National Prosecutor's Office said authorities have arrested 4 people there in connection with the fires and charged them with participating in sabotage or terrorist operations. On behalf of a foreign intelligence agency, Poland is working with other countries to find at least 2 more suspects. And Hot Air flagged this story. It says the head of Poland's prosecutor's office said that Russian spies were behind this test run. Other unnamed Western intelligence officials said the GRU was responsible, which is it's the new KGB, right? And so, Jim...
Actually, military intelligence, but yeah.
Oh, it's military intelligence.
FSB is the old KGB, GRU is their military intelligence, and they're both bad guys.
Last fall, Finnish investigators linked a Chinese-registered ship operated by a Russian crew to the cutting of the Baltic Connector natural gas pipeline to mainland Europe. And so the Russians seem to be up to no good, among other things that we've talked about at length, of course. So what do you make of the fact that this got sniffed out and what Putin and his allies seem to be up to here?
Yeah, well, it's going to sound like a non sequitur, but I hear that news and I think that the U.S. presidential campaign season lasts way too long. And that's not just because of Doris and Diane's messages. It's just a recognition that the presidential campaign takes up a big part of the news cycle. It makes us pay attention to the latest thing that each candidate said. And I'm not saying that that's not news, but foreign news tends to get squeezed out about it. As a result, we don't pay attention to things that seem like they should be a bigger deal. It was about a month ago in early October. I guess it was about a month ago. Director General Ken McCallum of MI5, that is the UK domestic security and intelligence agency, and said that the Kremlin spy services are on a, quote, sustained mission to generate mayhem on Europe's streets. Talked about criminal proxies working with the Russian spy network. Now, covering the Ukraine stuff, I paid a little bit of attention to this, not nearly as much as I probably should have. And at first it was like suspicious characters around European munitions manufacturing plants and things like that. Then it was reports of surveillance. Then it was reports of suspicious fires starting. And now we have this. We have this incendiary devices put on 2 airplanes. Look, this is how Russia wants to fight the war. We are not in a direct shooting war with Russia, but when people, generally who are opposed to supporting Ukraine argue that we are in a proxy war with Russia, well, we kind of are. People emphasize we're not at war with Russia. And that's technically true, but we're also not at war with Russia either, particularly when you see things like this going on. I've been frustrated with the lack of discussion about foreign policy and national security in this campaign. Generally, it's gotten 1 or 2 cursory lines and convention speeches and stuff like that. Look, the axis of the devils, the axis of whatever you want to call them, whether the Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, North Korea fired off missiles just the other day. I just kind of feeling that either at the Pentagon or at the State Department, there's this message of all circuits are busy now. Please call back with your foreign policy crisis, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. You can throw in Syria, Venezuela, and Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah. All of them hate us. All of them, they're not in a formal alliance. It's more of this opportunistic, we'll help you screw them if you help us screw them later on. Chinese ships can sail through the Red Sea, no problem. Houthis aren't shooting at those. A very good example, I think, of how these groups work hand in hand. Really important stuff. Now, we obviously are very focused on the presidential race, and it's a very important issue here in the United States. But the next commander-in-chief is going to have to deal with stuff like this, and I just have this nagging feeling that neither candidate or campaign has spent sufficient time thinking about this, talking about this, and bringing the American people up to speed on just how serious the threat is.
Well, again, as you're waiting for election results tonight and potentially for days, although I have to say, with 80 million people having already voted, it really shouldn't take that long to count the votes tonight. And again, I don't want a one-size-fits-all system across the country. But honestly, watch what Florida does. They're one of the biggest states in the country, and they've got everything pretty much wrapped up by, 10 o'clock? 11 o'clock Eastern time. So it can be done, people. It can be done. It took them a real big embarrassment to do it right, but they are now the gold standard easily on how to do this. So anyway, today's edition of the 3 Martini Lunch is brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, elections are stressful, whether you work on the campaigns, whether you just are really invested in who wins not only the presidential race, but other campaigns going on around you. Maybe it's your family circumstances. Maybe it's what's happening at work. Who knows? There are a lot of different stresses happening. And in November, it's really important to be thankful, to be grateful. Be grateful for your life, for your family, for the work opportunity that you do have. But if you're struggling with any of these things, try BetterHelp. First of all, it's professional. All therapists are licensed, accredited professionals. BetterHelp allows you to connect with them in a safe and convenient online environment. It is affordable. You just pay a low flat fee for both live sessions as well as messaging with your therapist. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it's convenient. Do it at your own time and at your own pace. Communicate with your therapist as often as you want and whenever you feel that it is needed. So let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/3ML today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML.
Did you know 8 out of the last 11 created jobs never really existed? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. Over the course of the past year, the Labor Department has revised the jobs report by over 1 million jobs. In case you forgot, the Federal Reserve was using this info when making their policy decisions. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So, Jim, one of the things that pushed critical international stories off the front pages in this election season is a lot of talk about which podcasts that candidates appeared on. So for our Crazy Martini today, let's talk about...
By the way. Neither Donald Trump or even Chase Oliver or Jill Stein, none of them had the guts to appear on 3 Martini Lunch just because we didn't invite them.
That's right. How dare they? How dare they rebuff our non-effort to have them on? But
do you know what it is? It's like we haven't had that many politicians on the show. I think probably just Chris Sununu and Joe Lieberman, and 50% of them are dead.
And Joe Lieberman hadn't been in office for close to a decade at that point, if not more. So Chris Sununu, the only sitting politician. That's a pretty good average. I like to keep it there probably. But nonetheless, let's talk about this interesting story that the New York Times actually flagged. Kamala Harris's interview, this is Fox News reporting on the Times, with a Muslim social media influencer never saw the light of day after the vice president refused to answer questions about Gaza, but oddly gushed about bacon, a food religiously forbidden for Muslims. Kareem Rama, host of the popular Subway Takes podcast, which boasts almost 1 million combined followers on Instagram and TikTok, made the decision to scrap the interview with Harris, which was filmed over the summer. Prior to the interview, Rama was hoping to press Harris on policy, specifically the Biden administration's support for Israel and the ongoing war in Gaza, which he opposes. But despite asking on 3 calls with her team and the Democratic National Committee, he was rejected. Instead, the campaign agreed that Harris would offer a hot take against people taking off their shoes on airplanes. The show's premise revolves around guests, some of them notable, defending an unpopular opinion or perspective. I'm not sure that's an unpopular perspective. I think most people want others to keep their shoes on the airplane. Quote, Rama ultimately agreed to the terms, reasoning that he could choose not to publish the video if it made him uneasy. But when Rama sat down with Harris for the interview, she offered a different hot take, declaring that bacon is a spice. Rama and other observant Muslims do not eat pork in adherence with their faith. Quote, I don't know, he reportedly pushed back in the unaired interview, which described him as taken aback. Think about it. It's pure flavor, she said, according to footage reviewed by the Times. Rama then reportedly paused the interview to tell her he doesn't eat pork, then attempted to redirect Harris upon the agreed-upon topic of taking off shoes mid-flight. But Harris doubled down on another food take, which the Times said was on the advice of a staffer, praising anchovies on your pizza. So, Jim, I think that's a pretty good microcosm about the types of level of discussions that Kamala feels comfortable having. Bacon and anchovies. First of all, bacon is a meat, and I love it. And secondly, what do you make of the fact that she was happy to talk about the frivolous stuff, but didn't want anything to do with the Middle East?
Greg, was today's third martini brought to you by Moink?
Could have been, should have been.
All right, so let me just observe that if Donald Trump had done an interview with a Muslim influencer and was asked, what is your favorite spice? And he answered, bacon. I love bacon. Bacon's my favorite. We would all be saying, like, his fan base would be saying it's the coolest thing he's ever done. And I think I would be saying it was the coolest thing he's ever. And in fact, Harris telling a Muslim interviewer that her favorite spice is bacon may actually be the coolest thing she's ever done. Inadvertently, of course. But I kind of think that, that sheer, I don't care what you think. I don't care what your dietary restrictions are. This is my favorite. I think that would have been very bold, so to speak. Yeah, no, actually, it was very revealing that Harris would do interviews like Call Her Daddy, but not, wouldn't do a sit down with a whole bunch of newspaper editorial boards. And it was really like pulling teeth for that first month or so. And also, like, I think this is what happens when you are afraid of offending any possible voter out there. Because imagine if you said, you're getting an interview like, oh, what's your favorite thing to put on a burger? And you answer bacon. And they say, that's under my dietary laws. That's not allowed. Like, oh, I'm sorry. You're missing out so much. I'm so sorry. But like you could play it off as a joke. You could play, like, if you're comfortable with who you are and, or what's your favorite, like, there are ways you can manage these sorts of things. And so the interesting question is, like, how did you make a question about this awkward? How did you make a question about this so bad that everybody decided, we're just not going to show it? The idea of the question takes a turn into Gaza stuff that you don't want to talk about. Okay, I guess. I mean, I think if you're want to be president of the United States, you should probably be willing to talk about Gaza. Like, it's not like the issue's going away. It's not like, like, I think it's a perfectly reasonable question for any, interviewer to ask about. And I think there's this fear at the heart of the entire Harris interaction. And I suspect, so in what I wrote today, which was the world's most phenomenally pep talk heading into the election, I pointed out that, like, I have no reason to believe that Harris is any more centrist than she was in her 2019 presidential campaign. No, I did not misspeak, because her campaign did not make it to the year 2020. And it's one of those things, like, people say, oh, no, Jim, she doesn't believe that anymore. Oh, Jim, relax. She has no principles. She has no true opinions. She only said that stuff because she wanted to win the Democratic presidential primary back then. Yeah, I think she will take the most leftward course available. And if the Overton window shifts a bit back to the right, which I think you can argue it has since 2019, okay, but her instinct is always going to be to take the most leftward option. I have no reason to think, like, maybe she won't ban fracking if she's elected for 4 years, but if public opinion shifts against fracking, I think she would propose a ban like that. I don't think there's anything she's not willing to do if it's not popular with 51% of the population in a leftward direction. Now, we've already talked about 90% issues, voter ID, things like that she doesn't want to support, that Democrats generally don't support. So I see no reason to think. I said I don't see, no offense to the David Frenches of the world, I don't see any conservative case for Kamala Harris. I do see Democrats deserve to get stuck with Kamala Harris for the next 4 years, and that make them live with her and the consequences of her word salad for another 4 years. But that is a grim silver lining to an otherwise dark cloud.
Yeah, I'd say another silver lining is what you mentioned with the Overton window, is the fact that the reason Kamala is abandoning these positions is because she knows that the mood of the country has shifted. I don't have any confidence whatsoever that if she is elected, that she would actually follow through on these allegedly more moderate positions. I think she'd go right back to where she was, particularly if she had the Congress to back her up on it. But I got to give her credit for potentially unifying Muslims and Jews at their horror of her advocating for bacon. I mean, that's not easy. Ultimately, I think her problem is that she's got like one sentence on where she stands on things that she thinks sounds good. But then if you drill deeper, which you'd have to do in an interview there, or if she went on Rogan, certainly.
Or when fracking.
She can't go any further than that. She'll say Israel deserves a right to defend itself and live in security. And then the Palestinian people have a right to peace and security and self-determination, all that stuff. And then you drill down on the details and she'll be sputtering, like your old car that you haven't fired up in a while. So it's telling that she can't get into the nuance very much.
Since the convention speech, she's been using the line, I will ensure that America has the strongest and most lethal fighting force in the world. Great. Where has this been in the Biden defense budgets for the past 4 years? Where were this in your stances on defense spending while you were a senator? Like, If this is true, great, but nothing in your past has made me believe this is what you actually believe instead of something you're saying because you want to get elected.
Will she be president, though? That's up to you. That's up to you, how you go out and vote today and determine the course of the next 4 years. And in other races, 6 years for the Senate, 2 years for the House, and a bunch of other state and local stuff on your ballot, I'm sure. So get in line, stay in line. I voted early. Mrs. Columbus voted this morning, and she said there was no line. So maybe all the early voting has made life a little more smooth on Election Day itself. So hopefully we got some concrete results tomorrow. One can only hope. Jim, see you then.
Greg, I'll see you tomorrow. Listeners, tune in tomorrow to hear us saying, we don't know yet.
We can always dream. Come on. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks very much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific election day. Again, don't forget to vote, and we'll see you on the Wednesday edition of the 3 Martini Lunch.